which they remain divided too. Shadow Defence Minister Andrew Hastie gave us his assessment of some of those areas from Perth. Andrew Hastie, welcome back to Afternoon Briefing. It seems that you start from a position very close to the government's on the strategic risks facing Australia in the region and the shake-up that flows from that. But pretty quickly you depart, though. What is the common ground? What do you think they got right in this Defence Strategic Review?
It's good to be with you, Greg. Well, I think there's a contradiction at the heart of today's statement from the government. On one hand, they say that we are facing our most challenging strategic circumstances since the Second World War. The Minister for Defence has said this, the Foreign Minister said this, the former coalition government said this in the Defence Strategic Update of 2020. I've said it countless times. So on that question, there is consensus and we agree. But we're expecting much more today. There's not a single new dollar spent. There's no strategy until next year. And there's also cannibalisation of capability because they're cost shifting within the defence budget. So we're expecting much more, and I was hopeful that there would be more, but there simply isn't. And
it's
this
quite
is a
possible,
deferral
though.
Of the hard decisions.
Yeah, OK. It's quite possible, though, here, isn't it, Andrew Hastie, that we will get a broader understanding of their budget projections beyond the next 4 years in the coming days or weeks in the lead up to the budget?
Sure, I hope so. I absolutely hope so, because if we are in our most challenging strategic circumstances, there's not a day to lose. We know that there won't be a strategy paper released until 2024, so we're already behind on strategy. And in terms of new spending, there isn't any. So you can see what I mean when I say there's a contradiction here. All
right. Do you object to all of the $7.8 billion in savings that have been clawed out of the pre-existing defence budget? And if so, do you have alternatives to pay for some of the new things that I think you agree on, like long-range precision strike missiles?
Absolutely. We agree on the development of long-range precision strike missiles. We're also happy to see the Henderson dry dock in the DSR. Of course, that was started by the former coalition government, $4.3 billion worth of investment there. So there are things that we certainly agree about, but what we're concerned about, and this is the biggest cut of all, is the cut to the infantry fighting vehicle program from 450 vehicles to 129. Right now we have 3 mechanised battle groups in the Australian Army. We have 3 RAR in Townsville, we've got 6 RAR in Brisbane, and we have 7 RAR in Adelaide. We're going to lose 2 mechanised battle groups. We're going to drop down to 1. That means we've got no redundancy. And God forbid our troops ever have to go into close combat. 1 mechanised battle group is just not enough. And so
just imagine the scenarios that, what they call them, literal scenarios that are sketched out in the review that might see the Army going to a nation in Southeast Asia or Southwest Pacific. Why would they be taking these infantry fighting vehicles as heavy and cumbersome like Abrams tanks as they are?
Well, we're not talking about Abrams tanks. We're talking about infantry fighting vehicles, which means they can transport a section or a squad of infantry up to 10 personnel and get them right up to the battle and in protected mobility. It also would have a 30mm cannon on top of it as well. So if we're talking about deploying the ADF into the region and potentially having a gunfight, you'd certainly want to make sure that your troops are protected. And right now, the announcement today means that we're going to step backwards in that capability, which is a significant cost to Army. Even if you deploy some of these HIMARS missile vehicles, they're still going to have to be protected by infantry, and it's always best to use mechanised infantry. In fact, this is the lesson of the last 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, I'm not arguing to prepare to fight the last war, but we can't ignore the fact that combined arms is an important part of the reality for effective infantry operations.
All right, can I take you to the review of the surface naval fleet? There's potentially some really big shipbuilding projects that are ensnared, at least temporarily, in this review. Do you accept that going to nuclear-powered submarines does warrant a reconsideration of the naval ships that were to be built alongside the French submarine proposal?
Of course, I think every government has a right to conduct a review, and as the situation changes, so too must our position. We are moving to nuclear-powered submarines, and that does have implications for the naval fleet. But again, let's wait and see. I've only just been pre-briefed 30 minutes before the Prime Minister stood up today. It's a large document. We're going to work through it over the next couple of days. But the headlines for me is that there's no new money and there's a deferral of strategy, and there's also a cannibalisation of army capability. And they're the three things that are most concerning to us in the opposition.
All right, and just on that final point, we've already partly discussed it, but reinventing army and reimagining its roles, they seemingly are going to be different from the era in which you served in very far-flung lands. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think you've always got to have an army that's capable of fighting in close combat. And if you just have infantry and not much else, they're really just a constabulary army. They're just light infantry. And so after all the hard lessons of the last 20 years, you know, potentially we're stepping backwards, and we're going to really degrade Army's capability. And if there's any lesson that we've learned over the last 100 years, is that armour is really, really important in close combat. And so we've got to have more than just one mechanised battle group. We've got to have redundancy. And Labor's plan today reveals that they have no plan for redundancy, and that's going to come at a great cost to the Australian Army.
All right, well, plenty here for all of us to keep an eye on, including the Shadow Defence Minister. Enjoy Anzac Day, Andrew Hastie, and thanks again for joining us.
Pleasure, Greg.